everyone to the Yale-China Association, and especially for our friends from New Asia College. I have the honor of welcoming all of you to this very special Yale-China Fireside Chat on a very good topic, one in which we are beneficiaries of every day. My name is Nancy Masbach. I have the pleasure of serving as the Yale-China Association's Executive Director, and pleased to bring some of the most interesting topics to this community that we come across when we do our work on the ground in mainland China and in the U.S. in the work in the areas of education, health, leadership, and the arts. Today we have a special guest, in fact, serving a dual role with us over the week. And for those of you, I know many people were unable to make it this week, but we do have a recording of it, which we'll upload to our website, pending the speakers okay. Please join me in welcoming Professor Maria Tam, Siumi Maria Tam, who's Associate Professor of the Department of Anthropology and dual roles at the university, as well as Associate Head of New Asia College. Yale-China has had a 60-year partnership with New Asia College, and we're celebrating that next year. And that's a very special milestone for us. New Asia College, as many of you know, is part of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, the oldest institution at the Chinese University, and we're thrilled to be such good friends and good partners with them. Professor Tam has covered numerous components within her research, but this talk in particular is called A Gendered Heritage, Hoklo Salty Tea in Hong Kong. For this community, we may not be as familiar with the Hoklo minority or salty tea, so we're particularly interested in hearing Professor Tam's unique perspective on this topic. And I'll let her go into that in particular, but the specifics of her background include not only her academic posts and administrative posts at New Asian College, but her research has really spanned the gamut. Cultural identity, family, work, especially in relation to migration and concepts of gender in Chinese societies, and also has just been teaching at CUHK since 1989. She's not, this is not her first visit to the United States. In fact, she completed her PhD at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and also has spent time in other parts of the U.S. From our conversations previously. So we are thrilled to talk with Professor Tam today. Please join me in she will prepare remarks, and then what we'll do is collect your questions, and then after Professor Tam presents her thoughts, let's encourage each other to have an open conversation, and I'll field some questions from the audience and really get into this lively conversation about Hoklo, the minority and salty tea in particular. So without further ado, thank you for joining us, and Professor Maria Tam.
Thanks, Nancy, very much for the introduction, and of course, with my hat as Associate Head of the New Asia College on, let me just thank everybody at Yale-China Association for inviting us, and this is a great exchange program, and I really enjoyed the few days that we've been here, so we've been very well taken care of, and thanks to the staff. And now I take off that hat and put on my anthropologist hat to share with you some of my recent research findings. This is actually a very small project that I have started doing a few months ago. Actually, I bumped into it because one of my students happened to be a Hoklo herself, and we never realized that the identity was important. And so when I was talking to her about, what do you eat and things like that, because that food culture is actually one of my research interests, and while we were going on, and she said, we have this very interesting tea called salty tea. Well, salty tea. I'm sure you've drank tea before, and tea is tea, right? But this is salty tea, and so we got into a discussion of this, and it sort of developed into a small project. So let me just start with some of the things that I found, and then we can go into the Q&A later on. So should I be hitting this so we can get the next slide? Now a little bit on the background of the Hoklos. Or in Mandarin is Hoklo, as in the crane, this very animal, the crane, the same word, but it doesn't have anything to do with the animal. Hoklo is just a transliteration of the group's name, and Hoklo meaning literally the men of the Hoklo community. Lo meaning men. So Hoklo or man with Helao or Fulao, Fulao meaning Fujian men. Okay, so it's actually a group of people who live in the area along the borders of Guangdong and Fujian provinces. Okay, and most of them are fisher folk. And when the British came, back in 1842, they were trying to survey the kinds of people that were living in Hong Kong, and they found that we had 4 major groups. No, the Cantonese never realized that we had 4 major groups. The British told us that there were 4 major groups, including the mainstream Cantonese people, and which they call the Punti, or the local people, and then the Hakkas, the guest people, 水上人, meaning water population, and then Hoklos. Now, as you can see, these 4 groups of people actually do overlap with one another, because with the Diankas also being fisher folk, or some of the locals also being fisher folk. So, 水上人 actually is a misnomer in a sense. But in any case, this is a kind of categorization in the census statistics for a long, long time. So we're sticking with that definition. And the Hoklos themselves, they are from southern Chinese coast, and as I was saying, most of them were fishing people, and some have moved onto land and started being farmers. The cultural stereotypes about the Hoklos in Hong Kong, we don't really talk about them anymore, really. But for the past 7 or 8 decades, they have been looked down upon. It's very much a social stigma to be a fisher. So if you're trying to marry somebody, for example, and your potential spouse is a fishing person or a water population, your parents are going to be saying no. So if it's a mainstream Cantonese family, they don't really want to be marrying down by, their children marrying into the water population. So partly because the water population is believed to have no assets, especially property. That's why they are living on boats. They have a livelihood of fishing. And so they're seen as even worse than working class. They don't have anything, really. And so they were traveling around in their boats. So the stereotype is that they are poor, they are inferior culturally. And the men are believed to be really fierce. They have this saying that as in heaven you have the thunder god, on the ground you have Hoklo men. They are that fierce, they're believed to be fierce. And partly, I guess, as an anthropologist, I would sort of think that it is because, as a group that are deprived of social and cultural resources, you have to be fierce in order to defend yourselves, in order to make a livelihood. So this is the kind of image that they give to the mainstream society. And in contrast, the women are seen to be really hardworking. So they are working day and night while the men are out there fishing. They will be at home taking care of the kids. Some of them are also farmers, so while the men fish, the women actually do everything in the farms, in the fields. So in a way then, I think what we're trying to argue today is that as a socially stigmatized group and inferior group, they have gradually moved away from that, and that's why I was saying nobody really asks if you're a Hoklo anymore today in Hong Kong, because we simply don't care. Why? Well, because after the war, a lot of the baby boomers, for example, have really made it in the financial and economic development in Hong Kong. So most everybody would have gone through the free education system, having made it, becoming professionals, and so your identity, in a way, of belonging to which particular provincial group is no more relevant. So it depends on whether you are now a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant. So these are the questions that are being asked, rather than which particular group do you come from. Okay. The interesting thing about this development, however, is this recent rise of heritage discourse in Hong Kong. In the past perhaps 6 or 7 years in particular, most of Hong Kong would have been engaged in a discussion or a social debate on what is heritage. That partly has to do with the UNESCO's very influential definition of World Heritage, and particularly with Macau, our sister city, having assumed a lot of these sites being designated as heritage or World Heritage, and Hong Kong people are so envious because we are, a superior society. We are richer, we are, everything, and we are more metropolitan. Why don't we have our own heritage? So that becomes something that is stuck in our minds, and so we are very, very eagerly looking for our own heritages. And I think the Hoklo salty tea falls very much into this discussion neatly, and so we have the recent rise of a heritage discourse involving the Hoklos. These are a couple of pictures that I downloaded from the web. These are not my pictures, but it shows you how heritage has been revived among the Hoklos. They have this custom of dragon boating on land. Dragon boating, with the paddles that the women hold, the ethnic costume that they wear, the headgear that you see here, very colorful kind of, very distinctive kinds of minority wear. This is actually a reenactment. This is not real. Sometimes they still do it, but most of the time they don't anymore. But it is seen as all reconstructed as a kind of cultural heritage. What they do is an reenactment of a wedding scene. In the past, as I was saying, they are a water population, they fish, and they live on boats. So when people get married, what do? They have to get the bride from the bride's boat, which is her home, to the groom's boat. And the womenfolk of the patrilineal family, or of the groom's family, will be doing this. So these are really the aunties and the sisters of the groom, and they will row the boat and pick up the bride and bring her back to the groom's boat. So now, as I was saying, they have moved on land. They are now living in public housing estates. They don't live on boats anymore, but they still do this in order to show that they are Hoklos. So this particular one that was done in Taiwan a couple of years ago is more a reconstruction, a reenactment. The problem with this, of course, this is all very colorful, this is all very interesting. My view, however, is that they have taken a lot of the important meanings, or the cultural meanings, out of the practice, because nobody really discuss who is doing this, why we're doing it, why are we doing it this way? A lot of the focus is just on the colorful dresses, the songs and the music, and nobody really asked, why is it the women that are doing this? Why not the men? When you pick up the bride, right, it's supposed to be the man's job. On the land, you would have men carrying the huaqiao, and to pick up the bride, but this is not done by men. This is only done by women. But nobody really asked, and so in my view, this is really a very much a female social practice that is degenderized in this discourse of constructing a heritage. Back to my study, I think I can actually compare salty tea to this dragon boating. It's all done by women. It's carried out by women. It's designed by women. It's learned only by women, taught by women. And it is so very much a gendered heritage. In a way, then, I think it also shows how salty tea, as practiced by the women, shows the kind of gender boundaries within the community itself, as well as the boundaries between a formally inferior group versus the superior mainstream society. I, through interviews, try to find out how people, when they practice salty tea, especially the women who practice salty tea, what it means to them as individual women, and what they use it to do. That is, do they create memories, or do they create new traditions, and why? And how do these processes go on to shape their social and cultural space? Okay, so these are some of the questions that I asked in my project. Now, this is a bowl of salty tea. It doesn't look very much like the tea that we drink every day. Let me just explain. This is a savory food. It's actually a food that you eat rather than drinking. This is further divided into three kinds: 咸茶, salty tea; 菜茶, vegetable tea; and 饭茶, rice tea. Okay. Rice tea is just a different version of 菜茶, because in 菜茶you put in the pop rice. It's like a popcorn, but we have pop rice. Okay, so instead of the pop rice in 饭茶, cooked rice is used, so steamed rice is used. So they're basically just variants of each other. And today what we could be focusing on is 菜茶, generally it's called salty tea. That's why I keep talking about salty tea. So let me just show you how salty tea is done. I don't think I have a laser pointer, so I just use my finger. Oh, okay. Here? Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. So you have a clay pot. This is a very important utensil for Hoklo women. Every Hoklo woman should have one at home. And when they get married, they bring one with them to their new home. So for my informants in Hong Kong, all of these pots were bought and brought from mainland China. It's not sold in Hong Kong. You can't really find it in Hong Kong very much. So they have to bring their own, as well as this stick, which is a branch actually from the pomegranate tree, because it's harder, so it's more hardy. And so this is the pot that they use, and there are creases, if you can see, in the inside. And so these are the tea leaves that get put into the pot and ground. And there we go. This is my student. You probably know her by now, right? So this is her mother, Mrs. Au. So what is being done here, you can see, is usually the daughters who are learning from their mothers and how to do it. And she has ground these tea leaves, and the mother would pour boiling water into it, making a tea base. And actually, a day or two before, she will have to start working. Okay, there's at least 7 kinds of vegetables. So you've got cabbage and whatever else. You don't use choy sum and the gailans, because according to them, these things don't taste good. So you've got all 7 kinds of vegetables, all fried, cut up into fine shreds and fried, and then you've got mushrooms and various things. Okay, I think we will then go on to see Mrs. Au in action. She'll be frying this in her wok. And this one, vermicelli or glass noodles, she's very proud of this. She kept telling me when she was doing this, and when she was cooking, that this is my very own recipe. Nobody else knows how to do this. Nobody else would put the vermicelli in. They have the dry shrimps and whatever, but they don't know that this is really tasty. So they're doing this. And there we go. After frying everything, she would put it on the table in the dining room, and she would put tea in it, and then she would put the vegetables of various kinds into the bowls right there. And these are her daughters. So this is Wai. This is the elder sister. And interestingly, so you see only the women working at the tables. Where are the men?
Watching
at the back. Watching TV, yeah. Okay, so Mr. Au is there, having his own bowl. Actually, you don't see the other young man who is the brother-in-law of my student, the husband of her older sister, who also has a little boy. So I think this is very symbolic. You've got all the men sitting there, eating and drinking, while the women are working. Okay, so this is the product. A bowl of salty tea with the vegetables, and then at the end you would add pop rice, sesame, and peanuts. And you eat it with 1 chopstick. One chopstick. You have a pair of chopsticks normally, but this is used. 1 chopstick is used. Okay, so now we go into the variations of salty tea. Of course, there are regional differences, as I was trying to tell you. Some people from the Lufeng area would have their own version. People from the Sanwei area would have their own version, and Buwei, etc., etc. So we try to move away from a monolithic view that the Hoklo tea is one particular kind of food. It is not. It is actually quite diverse. There are also seasonal variations, because the recipes have to depend on whatever is available on the market and in the fields. And the individual chefs, like Mrs. Au, she has her own favorite recipes, so the ingredients and the composition alter according to their personal tastes. And all of these put together, these family recipes handed down from one generation to the other, they're actually a source of pride and cultural capital for the women. Because especially in the old days when Hoklo women were not supposed to be educated, they didn't really have the opportunity to go to school. What do they have as a cultural knowledge that they can claim as their own, mainly salty tea? Okay. Salty tea, of course, is also a kind of cultural capital for the family. Because women then, at this particular point, become all of a sudden the pride pride of the family because they can make good salty tea. And so it becomes a source of reputation, good reputation among your fellow villagers. Everybody knows that, oh, this particular woman from a family can make really good salty tea. Okay, the variations also depend on what you are using salty tea for. If it's only an everyday salty tea, you would have the simple version. You have the tea, the pop rice, sesame, and peanuts, and it is eaten by women after work. So they would get up really early. Hoklo women, they get up 4 or 5 in the morning. They would go into the mountains, cut grass for fuel, and do everything else. And by 10 o'clock, they would be home, and they need to replenish. So they would make this salty tea and eat. Okay, so this is one kind. So the everyday version is carried out by small groups of women, especially kinswomen of the same family. So this would be sisters-in-law who go and work at the same time together, and when they come back, they would eat this salty tea. Salty tea is also done for a special occasion like weddings or the birthdays of an important person in the family, the patriarch of the family. And that becomes a community-wide whole-day affair. Okay, so people would have to start preparing as much as a week beforehand. So they start accumulating all these different kinds of things. The dry shrimps, they have to get them prepared, done, mushrooms and everything, the vegetables. And so 7 to 10 kinds of vegetables are being used. They have to shred the pork, marinate the pork, they have to cut up the shrimps, get the beans, everything ready. And they would then put a long table in front of their house on the day, and smaller bowls, specially used for the salty tea, would be lined up, and they would put the salty tea in these bowls. Anybody can come and eat. So you can imagine, if you have 200 or 300 people in the village, they would be coming by your house, and they would just gobble up your salty tea as you make them. Okay, so this is an all-day affair. You can't say no to anybody. Every guest, every person that comes to the door is a guest, so you can't say no. And so the participation of this affair really implies membership of the village. It also implies family membership. Interestingly, in contrast to the Cantonese, this is done only by women. If students from Hong Kong, I'm sure you have the experience of eating pun choy, and you must have heard about pun choy. It's all done by men. So you've got the farmers doing this by men, whereas the fishing folk doing, in the opposite way. Women cook and the men eat. The men never participate in the production of salty tea. Okay. So is this a women's affair? I think in a lot of ways it is, because it's taught, learned, and cooked entirely by women. And to the women who take part, it is very much a source of nutrition, because, as I was saying, they are really an inferior class in Hoklo society, and therefore this is almost the only time that they can get proper nutrition, from their back-breaking work. They're not eating properly. Most of the time in an everyday family meal, it's the men who get to eat first. Well, of course, the women get to cook and all that, but when the table is ready, the men come and eat. Whatever they have left behind is the women's meal. So it is still being practiced in mainland China, in a lot of the villages in the Hoklo area, or the Min Nan area. So salty tea is very much a physical necessity, because that's when you get your protein, that's when you get your fatty acids and whatever. It is also a platform for the formation of same-sex support networks, because when your sisters-in-law come together and share information and support one another, you also take this as an opportunity to develop female social and cultural capital, because you exchange ideas on how good salty tea is made, and you constantly improve on your recipes. Okay, now as I was saying, when people, fellow villagers come and eat, they show their membership, they show that they want to be affiliated with you, and so they come and take part in the community-wide salty tea parties. So to members of the lineage and the village, eating salty tea is very much a form of social cohesion. Okay, and so this knowledge is a source of family and village identity. Salty tea, of course, also plays a role as a public display. You know about the potluck, right? Among the Native Americans, potluck is an occasion when different groups come together and show off what they have. They would bring a lot of resources. They would give each other gifts, in order to show that they are affluent. Salty tea, I think, is also very much similar. In these special occasions like Lunar New Year and weddings and birthdays, you have people coming together and showing off that we can make good salty tea, that we have pork to share, that we have the knowledge to share. And therefore, because it's done by women, it is very much a reinforcement of gender roles and domesticity. When women can do it properly, it shows that you are abiding by the gender roles and the regulations that are expected of, that you are abiding by. So this is very much a reinforcement of intercentric organizations in the family. And one particular occasion that I want to mention is Lunar New Year, which is coming up. And between the 10th and 18th day, among the Hoklos, this is a special week for them, what they do is to organize these salty tea gatherings or give these parties if they have given birth to a boy in the previous year. So it marks this very important addition of a male member to the family. It is telling your ancestors, telling your fellow villagers that now we have another son added in the family. So there's another name to Tai Cha or Xian Cha, and they call it Kai Xin Cha, because you're really happy when you drink it, because you have a boy added to the family. And of course, it's not done when you have a daughter, right? So really very happy. But that's how they call it. So okay, so as I was saying, vegetable tea is done by women and learned by women. So in a way, then it's a reproduction of domesticity. In this particular picture is this is the mother, this is the daughter, and this is a granddaughter. It's not her daughter, but the daughter of her sister. So you've got 3 generations of women here, all taking part in making salty tea. And so the little girl here is actually learning or imitating the auntie and the grandmother in performing a good gender role, and trying to reproduce what they think is important. And you have, the grandma in action. She's teaching her daughter how to do it properly. Right? So otherwise, she's explaining the procedures, how you should be putting the pork in, how you should actually sprinkle the salt rather than just have this 1 teaspoon of salt put into the pork. You can't do that. You have to do this. So it's very much a hands-on training session. And the little girl is learning how to grind tea. There's no tea in it. She's just playing, having fun with it. But she's learning how to be a good little girl in the Hoklo community. There they go. This is the mother, and they are all learning how to do it. And in comparison, this Mrs. Owl, and Mr. Owl over there, and the boys there, all eating happily, whereas the women are working happily in a way. Okay, so what are we talking about? I think we are talking about the construction of identities through food. We are making food, but at the same time we are making our own identities as women among the Hoklos. So you have a particular historical context, an institutional context, and cultural context in which salty tea is understood. And you have these sets of values being constructed within this context. And so very much in the tradition of how Stuart Hall talks about social identities. You also have scholars like Laura Jane Smith, on heritage studies, who argues that heritage is really a very gendered kind of process. Because although a lot of people like to think about heritage is, well, heritage. Everybody's supposed to share this particular cultural property. We are proud of this particular tradition. But then, who is this we? Who gets to define what is important in our community? Who gets to have this heritage selected? Who gets to confirm the importance of this and be able to sustain this particular tradition? So Laura Jane Smith is arguing that how we've foster, how we maintain these heritages are actually related to how we foster and maintain our power relations in the family, in the community, as well as the kinds of knowledges that gets defined. And in salty tea production and consumption, I would argue that, at least on one level, the conspicuous lack of the other gender, meaning the man, leads to the fostering and maintenance of gender boundaries in the Hoklo community. Okay, so just going back to this overall discussion, salty tea is very much a social practice, as we just saw in the pictures, because on the personal level, it develops as a nostalgia and comfort food. For a lot of people, especially the younger Hoklo people, this is something new. It's not a comfort food for them, but it is very much a comfort food for people in their 50s, 60s, right? They have grown up on it. They remember their mothers doing it. They remember their grandmas doing it. And now they miss it after they have migrated to Hong Kong. So eating this food becomes something that reminds them of the good old days. That is something very nostalgic. On the other hand, it creates a sense of unity because, as I was trying to explain to you, being a Hoklo is not something to be proud of, or was not, or has not been something to be proud of, because when you're trying to survive in the mainstream Cantonese community. So all along you would want to hide your Hoklo identity. You don't want to be telling people that I am a Hoklo, because you don't want to be looked down upon. But all of a sudden, when this new heritage discourse comes in, you find that, well, we have our own heritage. Let's make it something that we can be proud of. Let's make it something that we can make a mark in mainstream Cantonese society. Because food is always something safe, right? It is always something that can be accepted easily by mainstream society. So it becomes then something of that has a different value. It creates a sense of unity. Now we can come out and tell people that we are Hoklo. So it is something very different. They have never had this experience before. So for the men, especially in the 50s and 60s, who have gone through a lot of discrimination by mainstream Cantonese, they now find that there is something at last that we can call out on, that we can send the message up, that it is a symbol of family closeness. This is a symbol that we also have our own wenhua, our culture, or even wenmin, civilization. We are civilized people after all. So, so these are some of the things, this is some of the quotes that I have for you. Like one person would say, my mother makes really tasty Hoklo salty tea. The way they construct this discussion is really interesting because normally you wouldn't say that my mother makes good, really Cantonese rice, right? I would go, my mother makes really good rice. She can cook really well. She makes good dishes. I wouldn't say she would, she can do really good Cantonese dishes. That's strange. So in a sense, the fact that Hoklo is being highlighted in this discussion tells you something. Okay. And this is another quote. One woman was lamenting, since grandma passed away, I regret not having learned how to make salty tea from her. So this is something that is learned from one generation to the other through women. Okay. So salty tea, in a way, offers older women a means for self-expression, although they didn't realize it. It allows them to gain personal power and recognition inside the home. But because of this, because they know how this is such a woman thing, that by maintaining it, by keeping up with this, they're actually reinforcing the boundary between women and men, because they're not teaching it to their sons. They wouldn't be asking their sons to learn how to do it. They only would be asking their daughters and their granddaughters to learn how to do it. And so paradoxically, they are limiting themselves as well as the men within the ethnic community. And on the social level, salty tea is considered now a regional specialty and a cultural heritage. We were talking about the older men in their 50s and 60s. Now we look at the younger men, the younger generation who were born and grew up in the 80s and 90s. they grew up in an age of development when Hong Kong was becoming really affluent, when we were industrializing, when we were becoming a financial center of Asia. And so nobody would be talking about a minority identity. But all of a sudden now we need to find out, aside from being a Hong Kong person, we need to know where we come from. We need to know what is the role of our community in Hong Kong society in order to be recognized as a fully fledged citizen. So these memories and creations of food, especially salty tea, becomes very much a part of this discussion and negotiation of identity. It helps them to reinforce a collectivist or collective solidarity as Hoklo, which used to be a stigma. And so it's very much a sign that we, the Hoklo, have made it. Now in Hong Kong, we are a group that has to be recognized as such. Okay, now of course, talking about salty tea would give the narrators a sense of place in a fluid context. It helps them tackle this in-betweeners, whether they are not Cantonese, but they are Hong Kongese, they are Chinese. So where should we situate ourselves? So in a sense, that it is also a rewriting of the script of the self through heritage. And as anthropologists love to argue, food is a social signifier. And in this particular case, salty tea is a signifier for the Hoklos. It provides the storytellers a tool to rework these different bits and pieces. There's the experiences of being discriminated against, the way they grew up in Hong Kong, how they managed to succeed, how they have achieved amidst all odds. And it helps them to make sense of the present, whether they are now a Hong Kong person, whether they are now a Chinese person, and how they can make plans for the future. So to anthropologists, artifacts like salty tea on the material level actually is a signifier of what is happening on the social and the ideological levels. So it's a mixture. It shows you the gender relations, it shows you the familial relations. It also tells you how you should be behaving yourself in a society that considers you as inferior. My focus, however, is one of the other focus is also on the gender difference. Because as you see, the men and women actually look at salty tea very differently, especially as the script of heritage is being written. For women, it's very much the relations that you have with your mother, with your grandmother, as you can see from the quotes just now. For the men who are now taking part, adding their voice to this discussion, is very different. Can I show you something maybe? To the men, it's more the social status and the public recognition that they can get from salty tea. Now, this is just one of the many online discussion fora, personal blogs and all that. And I like this one particularly because, with I think these are VCDs, right, of various sorts that are, put together very much like books in a library. It gives you a sense of, scholarly pride in the pomp and circumstance of, knowledge. So this particular man has this blog, and here, in one discussion, he was teaching others how to make salty tea. Okay. Now he never mentions where he learned it from, whether he learned it from his mother or whether he learned it from wherever. So he is assuming some kind of authority that I know how to make salty tea, and he goes on to teach others how to make it with all these pictures, tea and pork rice and peanuts and everything. And he goes on with a recipe and step-by-step instruction of how to make salty tea. The instruction here, of course, is that something that has always been a woman's knowledge is now becoming public knowledge. Very much, when it becomes public knowledge, it very soon becomes men's knowledge. It becomes a male knowledge. And in that particular example that I just showed you, you would see that very quickly young men or younger men are now using salty tea as a discussion of their own identity, and they're assuming this new cultural knowledge. So in line with what Laura Jane Smith argues, when you construct heritage, you really should be aware that values may be rejected or accepted or contested in the process. So we need to be really careful about what kinds of values go into this discussion. Previously, it was more the familial relations and women's bondage, and also women's bond among one another. Now it has totally been overridden, superseded, I guess, by men's understanding of what heritage is. Okay, so it has become degenderized, or it has become something that is agendered. So what we need to do is to avoid uncritical acceptance of these new debates or new discussions, and call for both androcentric and gynocentric treatment of the interpretation of salty tea. So what I'm really calling for is a gendered perspective of this particular heritage. Let's not forget that this has been a women's occasion, this has been a women's knowledge, that this has been a women's custom. And so people who are joining in the debate and people who are taking part in the construction of this tradition should be aware that it comes from a particular historical and institutional context. Okay, so at the end, we want to be asking these questions. As a gendered heritage, it needs a particular form of heritage management. Heritage management in the sense of creating and defining knowledge, as well as how to maintain and sustain the values as well as the practices that go into the heritage. Okay, so I think I will stop here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Tam. I think you've captivated all of us, and I'm going to ask the one question that is definitely on everyone's mind. Does it taste good?
It does. It does. It's wonderful. It's very good. It's very good.
And is it very salty? Is it? There's no salty leaves like qian.
No, the tea leaves actually is, well, regular tea is mostly Taiwanese. You all know Taiwanese. So it's just regular Taiwanese that goes into making the tea base. The salt or the savory taste comes from the preparation of the meat,
right,
and the vegetables. When you fry it, you add a little bit of salt. It's not very salty.
I have a lot of questions, but I will refrain. Please, if you have questions, raise your hand and identify yourself and your affiliation, and then please ask a question, not necessarily a long comment. Any questions from? Yeah.
Min Nan from Yale-China. Actually, this is truly interesting because I work in Hunan quite a bit. And on one of the field trips, this is more a comment, and also I want to ask you about whether there are linkages of this salty tea practice also throughout other regions of China. What I've experienced was also a salty tea version in that western part of Hunan, where they put salt in the tea with also popped rice and something else. I think also peanuts, grind up peanuts. I was told that this was a practice really stemmed from the old days when men or women, mostly men, need to go to the field and work. They sweat a lot, so they need the salt to maintain the balance and everything. And I thought it was quite interesting. It's also called lei cha in the region. So I don't know whether in your study you have come across like the regional variations of this salty tea.
Yes, very much so. Thank you for your comment. Actually, this is not something that is monopolized by the Hoklos in Hong Kong. As I was saying, they come from a cultural area of the southern Chinese coast. So for a lot of people, as you were saying, people who work a lot, have physical labor, they do need to find a way to replenish by drinking salty and sweet teas in order to combat this loss in their bodies. And so lei is actually the action. When you grind, when you sort of chop things up, and grind, it's called lei. So anything that can be put into a pot and ground can be lei cha. So it is also popular among Taiwanese communities, especially the Hakka people. Yale-China is also very famous, but they put in slightly different versions of ingredients. They would have a lot of sweeter stuff that goes into it. They have salt, but they also have sugar that goes into this. They would have glutinous rice going into it. So very much, I think whatever is available in that community goes into this drink. So this is very common, really. And for Hoklos, they would add their own versions of ingredients. As I was saying, they are fishing folk, so they add shrimps. And sometimes salt fish, it's very seldom, but they would tell me that, well, sometimes, if you need more salt in it, you would put in the salt fish, too. And so dried seafood could go into this because they are a fishing population. So I think it really depends on the community and the physical environment that they live in.
We have a question right here.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Wong, and I'm a student at Yale's Divinity School. I was interested in if you had anything to say about the shift from this being something that was given, or made first of all within the family, but then just generally given and generously given to anyone in your village, to now it seems if it's a heritage and a point of pride in Hong Kong society, then I imagine this is the kind of cultural capital that you could, say, sell in a restaurant or something. And so is there a kind of loss or just a shift in this food item going from being kind of a free community gathering kind of food to something that might be more commodified? What does that mean for this tradition?
Well, I think there are two sides of it. One is the commercialization part, right? I heard, I haven't really seen it, I heard that this has become a commodity on mainland China, especially in the Shanwei area. When in the normal, town market, you would see people selling lei cha or xian cha, because the women there find it so troublesome to make, because you spend days preparing it. So in order to save time, now people go to, you buy 10 or 12 or dollars or renminbi for a bowl. And I was told that it's not good. when it's being bought from the market, it's not as good as that made in the family. So so that has happened. But I think it is inevitable in a sense because of the social transformation, especially the fact that women are now assuming different roles aside from just being the labor in the family. So lots of women are now being educated. They are now going into different occupations, and so who would have that kind of time preparing salty tea? So I think you are right in that it has gone through a stage of commercialization, although it has not been completed because they're not making proper salty tea. On the other hand, it is being recognized very much as a cultural knowledge of the women, and therefore the recipes are fiercely guarded. As you can see from Mrs. Au, she was very generous in teaching me how to do it, showing me how to do it, but I think there are certain things that she hasn't said. She might be teaching her daughters how to do it, but probably not to her daughter's professor. So I think this is a very interesting kind of divergence in a way. So on the one hand, it's gone public, right? But on the other, it is still very much a private affair in the family. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes. Oh yes, please.
Oh. Thank you so much for your wonderful talk, Professor Tam. I'm Bethany. I'm a MA student at East Asian Studies here at Yale. And I wanted to sort of return to a topic in your question, which was with the xiancha or lei cha in other parts of China. I'm hypothesizing, though I don't know this to be true, and I hope you can shed some light on this. Would the xiancha or fancha or whatever it is, oh sorry, xiancha, in other parts of mainland China and Taiwan also be sort of a vessel for like this minority culture, cultural awareness to the same extent as it has become in Hong Kong due to the Hoklo being sort of a disenfranchised minority there?
I don't know if I have understood your question properly. You saying that because I've been saying that Hoklo are now trying to establish a kind of cultural status versus the mainstream Cantonese. Is this also happening in Taiwan, for example?
Yeah, you had mentioned with like Hoklo, with Kejia, their kind of tea. Would they also? Would it also? Would that tea also be a very sort of important? I guess would it play a social role in terms of their identity with mainstream, with like Han, with the mainstream society?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the question. I think both yes and no. In fact, in Taiwan, they are several steps ahead of us. As you probably already know, that Taiwanese government, under Min Nan, has been doing a lot of the localization work, indigenizing a lot of the cultural knowledges. So Yale-China is very much part of that discussion. So you all, actually in Taiwan, the Hoklos are not called Hoklo because they feel that this is a very rude kind of expression. Yeah, thank you, for a group. They officially in Taiwan, the Hoklos are called He Luo Ren, as in Huanghe, Luo Shui. This grand name, that's related to Huanghe and Luo Shui. And so this is a transliteration of Hoklo, so that it has become He Luo. But a lot of people argue that this is not a good name. No. So in a sense, He Luo implies that the group of people that are called Hoklo have come from Zhongyuan, right, from the Middle Kingdom. So they are the descendants of the proper Chinese civilization, right? And now they are in Taiwan. So by practicing these Lei Cha, they are actually reinforcing or reenacting the kinds of civilization that they brought over from Zhongyuan. But that's a kind of discourse. People, however, they're not very sure. They are a little bit ambivalent about this because if you want to state or be recognized as yourself, you have to be truthful to yourself. You have to know who you are rather than trying to claim a linkage to a distant, ascendant, ancestor who you don't even know, right? So in Taiwan, there is this big discussion of whether we should be called He Luo or whether we should be called He Lao. Just call us Fu Lao, right? We were just Fujian people, we're Min Nan people, so just call us Fu Lao. So whether Lei Cha can be used as a heritage negotiation instrument, we're not very sure. But that's happening among the Kejia in Taiwan. As you know, the Kejia, the Min Nan people, they are two big groups, but they are all Hans, right? Whether they are Chinese is up to interpretation. It depends on whether you are Min Nan or Min Nan. But I think the Kejia are very good at doing this, very similar to the Hoklos in Hong Kong, because they have always been put down, being socially marginalized, and therefore, as one of the bigger groups, they have been making use of their cultural heritages to reinstate, a more equal status in Chinese society. They have not only done this through Lei Cha, they have also, practiced it through the various festivals. They have manufactured festivals, if I may say that, all these various flower festivals. I don't know if you're, familiar with those Tonghua Jie, for example. This Tonghua Shu, we have this huge, glorious flowers that blossom, and they will make it into festivals. So everything that is somehow related to the Kejia tradition is being now commercialized or being publicized as a heritage. So, of course, these are all new. So anthropologists will argue that, what is a tradition? Can you call something that is 10 years old a tradition? Can you call something that is 10 years old a heritage? We're not very sure. But then, of course, this is all up to negotiation. But I'm just trying to answer that. I don't know anything about Hunan. Perhaps you could tell us more about what's happening in Hunan. But I think, at least in Taiwan and Hong Kong, that we are more familiar with, this is happening in different ways, and truly it is a contestation of cultural meanings.
I think I have a final question with Lucy.
Hi, I'm Lucy, and I work at Yale-China as well. I find it rather interesting that this cultural tradition that has been predominantly, passed down from mothers to daughters, like, through female lineage, but it sounds like the men are the ones that feel sort of proud that there's a resurgence in pride in their heritage. So I'm just trying to understand why is it that the men, even though they are not involved in the cooking of it, why do they feel more sort of empowered? Is it because traditionally they feel like they bared more of the brunt of the discrimination? So that's, I guess, one question. Why is it the men feel, and also just how does the women perceive that kind of men's increased, empowerment? Do they resent it? Because I feel like if I'm a woman, I feel like, well, we did all the work, and now you are sort of taking credit for it. Or do they feel like, no, this is great for our men because we've seen them kind of going through this kind of, generation of discrimination. So can you just elaborate how that kind of dynamic is?
Yeah, I think this is a great insight in a way. I think the women are basically proud of it because at last the men recognize our work, right? And they think that this is important. So I think most of the sentiment is that, that they are happy about it. But I think they probably would then, at a later stage, maybe, well, as you said, why is it that we are doing all that work? I was, before I came to New Haven, I was watching TV, and coincidentally, there was this, I think, a TVB production. I don't know if you've seen it, about a Hoklo person, a Hoklo man, inviting a TV host to come into his home and show off his family dishes, and that was a Hoklo salty tea. So he was a Hoklo. And then he was gladly explaining, this is 7 kinds of vegetables, this, that, and the other thing. And his wife was there at the back. And then at one point, the host was asking, so how did you make this and how did you make that? And the husband said, well, I don't really know, because my wife did it. So I thought that was very interesting. That is a good description of reality, that he really doesn't know, because his wife has been doing it all the time. But then I think it's also symbolic that, why is the TV host interviewing him? Shouldn't she be interviewing her? Right? So I think a lot of this patriarchal values do come through when we don't really think, we don't critically rethink the kinds of taken for granted values that are so prominent in our society. But and I think that applies to the Hoklo women, because they haven't been really asking these questions, and I think so on the first in the first stage they probably feel very proud of themselves that at least now we are being publicly recognized. I forgot the first question. What is it again?
Yeah,
first part of the question.
Because I think coming from I'm from northern China, so our kind of food thing is like dumplings, right? For example, since teenagers we make that, but we don't have this kind of gender dynamic. We just all know how to make it, and we don't say oh the woman. Granted, my mother ends up making most of it because my dad has to work, right? But so I find that interesting that this is a very mother to daughter kind of a thing, and mainland Chinese can only have one child, so sometimes you have a son, so you just teach your son, right? So there's that kind of cultural passing down, but there's not a gender.
Yeah, but I think you're younger than I am, much younger. So you probably haven't gone through the stage when you have more siblings in the family. If when we're talking about older type of Chinese families, you probably have more children, and then the mothers would probably be teaching whatever kitchen skills to the daughters rather than the sons. I remember growing up, my grandmas would kick my brothers out of the kitchen. Don't fool around. This is not your place. Right? So I think it's mostly a daughter's job to learn how to cook. And so I have my mixed Chinese students in the anthropology department. These young men, and some of them know how to make dumplings. But I was struck by one young man who told me that, well, 在家里嘛都是女的在做. And I asked him, so what about you? Right? And say, well, I just wait and eat. So it's mainly the women, and I guess there are variants. I mean, there are variations in different parts of China, I must add. But generally, a lot of us still have this idea that the domestic sphere is very much the woman's place. That's still happening very much.
And tomorrow we'll hopefully continue when Professor Tam gives us a demonstration of how to make. Salty tea?
I brought my pot.
That's wishful thinking. This is so incredible, Professor Tam. I think you really have everyone in this room thinking about a variety of things, but looking at food in particular as a potential anthropological thematic basis is fascinating for us, especially as we begin to think about the Lunar New Year and all the symbolic foods that we're about to enjoy in the next week or so. But please join me in thanking Professor Tam. Just a small token of our... This is a book that we thought is written by a member of our community, of her autobiography, a family portrait, right, about a concubine in their family. So I don't think there's I read it, and I don't remember any salty tea. No, Shanghai. No. Okay. But thank you so much. This is fascinating. And with your approval, we'd love to put up your slides and the video for mass consumption. So please enjoy. Talk to one another. Maybe speak with Professor Tam. We had the house open for another half hour, so enjoy and stick around. And of course, you see how some things on the floor. We are celebrating in a great way the Lunar New Year, the year of the snake, which Lunar New Year is on Saturday. And we have our annual fundraiser on Friday, which many of you will be at. But on Saturday, we have Chinese New Year, Lunar New Year on the streets of New Haven. So if the brochure on your chair should share a little bit more about those details. And if you didn't get one, I can get one.